everybody, and welcome back to another week of the Let's Talk Social Innovation podcast. I hope you've had an amazing start to your week, but if not, we can kickstart that right here. I'm your host, Ian Kahinde, and y'all know the deal. First things first, gotta get through this week's bulletin board. So, the Office of the Provost invites you to share your vision for general education reform at our upcoming student engagement event, Aspire and Inspire, Chart the Future of Student Learning at Pitt. This event will take place in the University Club Ballroom B from 5 p.m. to 7 p.m. on Monday, March 24th. Dinner will be served, and we will be raffling off Panther Pride baskets. Students can receive OCC credit for participating. RSVP at the link in the bio. Next up, the leap from social media posts and chats with friends to effective social action feels like it's ever growing. Join Dr. Daniel Mikix on March 25th at 6 p.m. in Cathedral of Learning 2017 as we explore how we can find meaningful steps towards social engagement and change. Dr. Mikix is a current Fulbright Scholar at Pitt and a senior research fellow at the Institute for Political Science at HUNREN Center for Social Sciences in Budapest. He's also a guest lecturer at the Outpost Loran University, Budapest. His research interests include social movements, civil society, and political participation. All information can be found in the bio below. Next up, enjoy an exclusive interview with current Frederick Honors undergraduate Meghana Datta as she discusses the inspiration behind her recent children's book publication, There's Color Everywhere, on Thursday, March 27th from 1 p.m. to 2 p.m. in room 630 in the William Pitt Union. Moderated by Rada Doka, this celebratory gathering will take a look into how a children's book is made, where the author will discuss how Reese teaches us the importance of empathy, fairness, and embracing the many colors of the world around us. The discussion will end with a formal Q&A session and time afterwards to meet the author herself. Register down at the link in the bio. Now, just about now, there should be something on your screen showing everything that we just talked about with the bulletin board and all the QR codes and things to scan for information. But anyways, y'all, bygones be bygones. Everything else aside, the real reason we are here is the incredible Dr. John Brigham, professor of civil engineering at the University of Pittsburgh. How are we feeling today?
Doing well, thank you.
Yo, we have a little bit of a history, as you did teach me 2 years in the civil engineering program.
This is very true.
We go far back. Well, not too far back, but far back in terms of my college career.
True.
So this episode's been brewing for a long time.
Absolutely.
But anyways, y'all, as always, we'll be going through Dr. Brigham's backstory, the things that made him the man that he is today. We'll be closing off with best life advice, as we always do. Then we'll be hitting our artist spotlight. And in the second half, we'll be talking about the impact of travel on worldviews. But anyways, everything else aside, take me from the beginning.
So, I mean, if I go back really to the absolute beginning, right, I was born in Burlington, Vermont, that's basically where University of Vermont is located for people that don't know the state, right? So it's kind of the Queen City area of Vermont. But then I primarily grew up just south in South Burlington, Vermont. My parents were, kind of your just quintessential working people. My mom started her career actually as a special ed teacher in northern Vermont, and that was it's funny kind of backstory, thinking that I think in a lot of ways I am my mother's son, which is why I am here, a teacher today. But it's a bit sad, right? It's one of those disciplines, as we see around us today and everything that's going on with education. Even back then, 40 years ago, it was a struggle. Those programs were underfunded. The people involved were just really, really difficult to deal with, and it was never about the students, right? As it never is. It's always the things around them that are causing the problems. And so she had to abandon that when I was very young, and ended up self-training herself to become an interior decorator, and did that, busting her butt every day of my life that she existed.
So we're talking about designing interiors for people's houses or commercial or what?
Yeah. Just home decorating. She learned how to make draperies, so she made a lot of draperies. She actually, I think, made draperies for one of the founders of the band Fish.
Really?
At some point, yeah, because they had a home in Vermont, and so word got out, that kind of thing. But I mean, that was, this it makes it sound glamorous, but it was a working job, right? She sewing all night every night, and in her store every day, dealing with customers and stuff like that.
Well, if you're doing what you love, does it really work?
Yeah. Well, it was work. It definitely was.
So how was it growing up in Vermont?
No, it was good. I mean, we had a little house down by the airport, but it was nice. The nice thing about a place like that, especially being in the area that we were, is we were close enough to the populated parts of the state, right? I mean, it's a small state with a small population, and so you can get very rural very easily. But the area that we were in was a bit more populated, so the schools were pretty good. The public schools were pretty good. You could walk to places, those kinds of things.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't know a lot about different chains and things like that, right? We didn't have a big super grocery store. We didn't even have a Walmart until probably I was about out the door, moving somewhere else, that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
It was a great place, though. I mean, it was a great place to explore the outdoors, to ride around on your bikes and go sledding in the wintertime, those kinds of things. So yeah.
Now, take me through your schooling experience in Vermont.
Yeah. So as I said, everything that we did was through the public schools. I did actually spend, well, that was a bit of a lie. I spent 1 year at the private Catholic high school my first year because I had a desire to kind of get away from where my older brother had tread. Make your own name in life.
Little brother syndrome.
Exactly. But no, I was super lucky in so many ways when it came to education. It's funny, I went to which apparently I found this out much later in life, at some point had the reputation of being the bad elementary school, which I would very much argue, though, with anybody that ever claimed that, because had some of the most spectacular teachers, especially like upper admin people. I mean, the names I can still remember. It was Mr. Marcotte, I think, was the principal of that school, and was just the nicest person you'd ever meet. I think he met every single parent that ever knew them by their first name that went to the school, and of course, all the kids he knew. And if you ever had a problem, I remember I had a friend that used to get sent to the principal's office too often. Yeah. He said, but it was always fun because Mr. Marcotte would give him a soda and he'd be able to sit down and chat. But it was funny because I found out much later that I guess we were the poor kids, or we were the ones that people didn't think as well of. There's a opinion article somebody wrote to our local newspaper when I was in high school, criticizing the kids that went to this school called Chamberlain, saying, I just feel so bad for them. They're always dressed so poorly, and they always look like the only thing you can find, or the only kind of place you could find that sort of stupidity is in the places that don't have anything else to complain about.
Exactly.
Yeah. But then the local South Burlington Middle School after that, and local South Burlington High School, and then that was it, right? That was the education in Vermont. I chose to leave the state for college. I went to Vanderbilt.
Did it have to do with the little brother syndrome?
Oh, definitely, yeah. Everything has to. That's the major trajectory of my life, right? Just to try to avoid whatever. I'm kidding though, right? I mean, it definitely was a factor, but not the only one. Because even then, right? I mean, even then, as the burgeoning internet in my youth and things like that, you still had a sense of the bigger world out there, and it was nice to get out of Vermont. I think I really love it, and I always will. But it's, I said, it's a small place, a small population. You don't get to experience a lot. I mean, I shouldn't say these things because I've not verified the numbers, but I was always told growing up it's the whitest state in the union, and not for any, at least in my own experience. I mean, this is easy to say, right, from that kind of perspective, but from my own experience, not because of some reasons of hate or prohibition. It just was, that was the nature of the population.
I think it makes sense with the placement of Vermont just so far north historically, with the way that other minorities move around the country.
Yep.
Like PA is probably like the highest north that they go, really.
Yep, exactly. But that said, we always had, I always had at least, people of color in my classes. I understood that there was something other than, my own family and my own neighbors, whatever. There was some diversity out there in the world. And so, that was definitely part of the desire to explore that, right? Just not in, I'm making that as an example. I'm not saying that's the reason, but it's an example of just knowing that there's a bigger world out there and wanting to explore that.
So then going to Vanderbilt, I'm taking it as that was a more diverse area.
It was, although I think, I didn't realize, it's funny, it was more diverse definitely than growing up, but it's always interesting. I talk to my wife sometimes when we reminisce, because that's where we met. I met my wife at Vanderbilt, and we'll reminisce about our experiences there. And so she's Taiwanese. She's ethnically Taiwanese. And she'll comment sometimes that it actually was a shock for her because she grew up in a more populated area. She grew up in New Jersey, relatively near to New York.
I'm sorry for her.
Yeah, I give her a hard time about that too. But she'll say it was a little bit of a shock the other way for her, right, where it was less diverse for her because it was, it's a little bit of that quintessential wealthy private school type crowd, right? I mean, again, that's not how I grew up, but that it's, did seem like, I'm just saying this colloquially or from my own perspective, right, without having verified numbers, that it always did seem like it was a lot more of the kind of the wealthy private school crowds.
I mean, I have the same opinion of Vanderbilt being preppy.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, she was kind of surprised when she got there and she didn't see a lot of people that looked like her, right, and a lot of other Asian people or black people that she had gotten to know in high school and, like I said, in a much more diverse environment. But for me, it was. I mean, for me, it was much more, and especially at least Nashville itself was a much more diverse city, right, than what I grew up with. Not just, again, people, but opportunities, culture, the things that you could do in that area. So that was a nice thing. But all that said, though, I actually determined that the South wasn't for me, right, and culturally was not my favorite type of place. And again, not because of that stuff, not because of additional diversity, but just because of just
I had to get away from it.
Yeah, exactly. The pace, right? The feeling. There's a vibe, right? In everything that you do. I find myself in a place like Pittsburgh feeling much more comfortable than I would in Nashville. That kind of thing.
So then, moving forward from Vanderbilt, take us through the rest of your academic career.
Yeah. So, again, a great academic experience at Vanderbilt. I had some of the best teachers I could have imagined. I mean, one that stands out for me is a woman named Lori Troxel. Taught me a lot of the structural classes that I had, and was just such a standout in like truly caring about the students and wanting you to learn as much as you possibly could. So her and another professor I had there named Hoadley really helped encourage me to go on and pursue graduate education. And so I applied to a few schools. I wanted to be, as I said, I didn't love being in the South, so I wanted to go further north. So I looked just in a few places up here and ended up at Cornell. And I applied directly to a PhD. They have kind of a combined program where you do like an MS and a PhD together. But really, at the end of the day, you're really a PhD student the whole time. Mm-hmm. So I jumped right into that. And again, I had a heck of a lot of luck in life in terms of the people that I met and the people that I interacted with. And so I didn't know really at all what I was going to do. I was one of those people, I always advise people, when you're going to grad school, best thing you can do is have at least a rough idea what you want to do and start contacting people about that, right? Because I didn't do that.
So then why did you go to grad school?
I wanted to teach. I wanted to be an educator. So that's it, right? Which, of course, is, again, most people will tell you is not a great reason, because so few people with PhDs end up being professors. It's just the minority of the group, right? Just because there's just not, there's a lot of job opportunities of different types for anybody in any position, right? And that's one category of job that you could have with a PhD, but it's not the only one. So a lot more people go off to do other things. But yeah, that was the reason. As I was saying, I got super lucky. A guy starting his first position as a professor, as an assistant professor at Cornell, started the same day I did. His name was Wilkins Aquino. And I was lucky enough that I think within the first few days I was there, he sent me an email and said, "Hey, I see that you're a new student. Would you like to have a chat about research?" And I went there, met him. He was exciting. He's a nice guy, fun, interesting. Had a great accent. He's from the Dominican Republic, so it was a small reason, but I do have to admit that he always has a great accent. And then from then on, that was it. We were working together for the next 5 years, and that was really such a moment of luck, and it guided everything that I did there, right? Because your advisor during a research degree like that, a master's or a PhD. They're helping you choose the classes that you take. They're directly teaching you a lot of things. I mean, him especially. I learned so much directly from him, and it was amazing. I mean, he's one of the smartest people, if not the smartest person I've ever met. again, it was an opportunity to, not just learn academics, but learn about the world, because he had his own interesting journey, right? He sort of grew up in the Dominican Republic, but then came and he did his education at Purdue in Illinois, and then ended up starting his academic career as as assistant professor at Cornell. So it's cool just to hear about his experiences in life and things like that, because I've always, people interest me. So it's not just that he was an educator, but he was a cool person to work with.
So all in all, how would you categorize your time at Cornell?
Oh, it was great. Loved it. I had good friends, good experiences. It was hard work. Some classes were easier than others, and of course, I think most people will tell you as you're doing your PhD, there's ups and there's downs, right? There's the big successes, but then there's huge failures, and I think that's the nature of research in academia too, right? It's everything from, the struggles of trying to get a paper published, to just the comments that you get from even the people that you are closest to you, right? Will give you these tough comments that make you have to work hard to try to better what you're doing, right? It's a tough field in that respect, right?
So moving forward, take us to how you came to Pittsburgh.
Oh yeah. So again, I feel like the theme of this, my background, is luck. So I was lucky enough to meet another fellow when I was at Cornell, Chris Earls. So he's a professor at Cornell University now, but he was a professor here at Pitt. And so I say luck. There's distinct possibility that I would have still pursued position here in Pittsburgh. This is a great place, a great city, all that stuff. But just the fact that I knew this guy and he knew enough about the department to kind of give me some inside information. Hey, you can consider applying there. They're looking for somebody in this area, right? And because it's always very specific. You want somebody that does, structural research, or they do environmental research, or something even more specific than that, right? So he knew that they were looking for people in the kind of mechanics area, structures area. And so he kind of pointed me in this direction. Gave me good advice in terms of how to apply and how to interview and things like that. And so I was, again, lucky enough to get an interview, and then even luckier to get a job offer. And that was basically that, right? I submitted my PhD thesis, and about a month later, I was walking in the door here to start my academic position.
So how has your time at Pitt shaped you as a person?
Oh, that's a good question. It's I have to admit, for a person like me, it's almost impossible to answer, because it's been a long time, right? So I started here in 2008, and there was a period of time that we get into later if it's relevant, where I left Pitt. I went and I taught in England for 4 years, from 2016 to 2020, and then came back, right? And I've been here ever since. But it's a process, right? In terms of professional experience, it absolutely made me who I am today, right? The thing about being an academic anyway, like an academic track type professor where you're doing teaching and research and all that stuff, I think is frankly a lot of on-the-job training. There sometimes you'll do workshops on something, or sometimes you'll go and spend some time learning about different research methods out somewhere in a more formal environment. But really, in a lot of ways, right? A lot of the most critical ways, your actual, active teaching classes, the actual act of writing research proposals and advising students on how they're doing their research and stuff, you just sort of learn it as you go. And so, the people in the place shape that. There's no way around it, right? So having the great colleagues here at Pitt, people like, right next door, Dr. Julie Vandenbush was critical in giving me advice. Dr. Harry's downstairs. Without them, I wouldn't have been able to traverse a lot of the things that are here. You learn quickly that you got to ask for help, right? Not just from the people here, but the people out in the world, right? You call up the program managers in the places that give out grants, and they'll give you advice on what types of things are getting funded, or what types of things that you should focus on when you write your grants. And then teaching, it's a lot of trial by fire, right? You get direct feedback from students, especially if you're young and they can approach you. You'll have some students that come up and they'll say, "Hey, I didn't quite understand what you were doing there. I think that we could do something like this better." But of course, then you also get the written feedback. Every place in the world has some sort of evaluation for teachers at the end of the year. And so some of that was supportive, and sometimes it was soul crushing, right? And so that stuff, once you're done crying about it, you try to adjust, right? Try to realize what it is, and reading in between the lines of "I hate you." Okay, why did they hate me? What did I? What is it that I think I could have done better? Maybe to improve that experience. So yeah, it's like I said, it's so much on the job training, and it's so much trial by fire.
So then moving forward from the academic and professional aspects of being in Pittsburgh, let's move to the social aspects. How has it been finding community? Also, the other thing is not to like throw all my ideas right now. I feel as though the vast majority of engineers tend to be more introverted and more type A.
Sure.
I don't think you fit into that category.
You think?
I don't think so.
Oh, I'm such an introvert. Yeah.
I mean, I think there's a spectrum, I guess, where it's like over here you have the I don't want to talk to people.
Right.
And all the way over here you have I can't shut up.
Right.
You're like right in the middle. How has that impacted finding community here as an engineer?
Yeah, I mean, that one again, it's a tough thing. So I tend to be very much a homebody, right, outside of my job, and outside of this, as much as we can talk a lot here face to face. I'm not good with groups at all, right? I'm very easily distracted. I in terms of like a group social setting, things like that. So, in a lot of ways, the word community, even in itself, intimidates me, right? Because I'm like, I don't want to go out and have to interact with lots of people at once. But unfortunately, I think the nature of being a professor in a Research One environment and trying to get tenured and promoted and stuff like that, it leaves little time, at least for somebody like me, it leaves little time to do much in terms of building community, interacting with community. I get out, if not for my wife, I'd probably get out a lot less, but we get out and do social activities. We go down and we'll spend time at the improv club, or we'll go to different events at the different restaurants, and stuff
Is
like
she
that.
the social motor and you're the social anchor? Is that what it is?
Probably. But we're both pretty much introverts, so that's the problem when it comes to, as I said, when it comes to more of like a group interaction. I think we're both people that do well one-on-one, and do very well talking to each other because of that. Mm-hmm. That's where we spend most of our time.
I mean, it makes sense over 20 years of happy marriage.
Yeah, well, there you go. Exactly. But yeah, I'm sort of racking my brain here thinking, yeah, I mean, I'm kind of lame when it comes to that.
And that's okay.
Yeah.
I mean, we all have different ideas of success and happiness. So who's to say that you have to fit into the box of an extrovert?
Yeah, no, exactly. And it's funny, I think in a lot of ways we'll get to the life advice part of this, and I'll probably contradict this, but I do in a lot of that stuff solely identify through my job, right? The energy that I have to put into working on a community is primarily on the student community. I would rather spend my time developing that, helping young people grow and be successful. And then when I'm done that, and then it's kind of it, right? I want to just be with my wife, hang out with the dog, that kind of thing.
So about your home life, what is inside your family?
Oh, so well, right now in our household, it's just wife and a dog. I think what is the term somebody told me recently? Dinkwad. Dinkwad, right? Dual income, no kids, with a dog.
I see.
So that's what we are, right? It sounds like that's probably what we'll forever be. But no, it works for us. And then I'm lucky if my dad ended up. So my mom passed away. Oh, it's been so long now. I want to say 2005. It was. So it's been about 20 years now. And so my dad ended up moving to Pittsburgh the same time we did, basically in 2008, right? Because he had sort of he didn't have a lot of stuff that was holding him to Vermont at that point, right? His parents, my grandparents, had moved to Delaware. He still had sisters and other people that were around, but he just sort of said, my son, or one of my sons is now in Pittsburgh. It's a pretty cool place, so he moved with us there. So he now just lives up the road, which is great, so we get to keep an eye on him, and he's also a good social pull because he'll get out and do stuff. He's pretty active. Like, he loves to go to the jazz concerts here in Pittsburgh and stuff. So we get to go to do some of that stuff with him, which has been great.
There's a lot of fun stuff to do around here. So what's your relationship like with your older brother?
Oh, it's good. Yeah, I still, will bust his chops every now and again about, beating me up when I was a kid and things like that.
Yeah.
But no, we have a pretty good relationship. The downside there is he's the other side of the country, right? So he lives out in San Diego, California.
That is the other side of the country.
Yeah, exactly. It's about as extreme as you get in terms of east-west direction. I guess it would be worst if he was in Alaska, right, or something like that. Or Hawaii would be worse, right? That's harder to get to. But no, he's a great guy. He's working hard. He's got a couple of kids. It's crazy scary to me now is his daughter, my niece, is now in college.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it's like, time has flown. That's it.
I hear you on that. Well, I think now is a good time to ask the question that we ask everybody who comes onto this podcast. What is the best possible life advice you can pass on to the people watching and listening?
Yeah, I know you were going to ask that, and it's a tough question. It's funny because I when I think about this, and I pondered this for a while, I have the advice that I want people to take, but it's not necessarily the best advice for an individual, right? The advice that I want you to take is simple. It's don't forget the golden rule, right? I think we as a society, at least from my own experience, and maybe this is just the nature of getting old, right? Sort of reach that middle age point. Maybe everybody says the same thing, where you just worry that not enough people are looking at the perspective of, I should do what's good for my neighbor, not necessarily for myself. And if we all do that, by golly, wouldn't it be great? That kind of thing. But on the individual level, I should, answering more of the real question of what do I think is good for a person. I stick to, again, I don't want to own something that's not mine. It was, I think, the best advice that one of my mentors, I mentioned him earlier, Chris Earls, had given me as I was getting into this academic position, right, about to take my role here at Pitt. And he said, John, one thing to do to make sure of, because you can really easily fall off the track on this, is he said, do not only identify yourself based on the job. Have some other way that you think of yourself, that yourself existing. And it's not just, it was such, I've reflected on that over the years, and I've told it to a lot of people individually, because I still do think it's such a great advice. And it's not just to say, don't work yourself to death. And in fact, I'm not even sure that that's the key takeaway from it. It's don't evaluate your own worth based strictly on how your job is going. Because no matter what you do, you could be Elon Musk, making billions of dollars, and there's still going to be, times where you're not successful. And you can't let that destroy you, right? You can't let that put you into a depression, right? You have to have some other way to say, no, I am not just my career. I am more than that. There are other ways that I am successful. For myself, it's that, I have a wife I love. I have the best dog in the world. These are the things that make me happy. I can tell you any movie trivia from 90s films that you could ever possibly ask me. These are the things that I'm proud of for myself. As stupid as they might be for somebody else, I don't care. I have chosen to identify myself through those things, and that makes sure that I stay grounded, right? I don't get lost in the struggles of just, working life, right? Working hard and trying to be successful.
Not just losing yourself in it, causing another whatever life crisis.
Yeah, exactly.
I think that is some great advice. Yeah. So now moving forward, we're going to touch on this week's Haven Artist Spotlight. We'll be playing you the song Somebody Else's Country House by Westinghouse Atom Smasher. I hope y'all enjoy.
else's country house. They're away. Oh, get along, little doggy. Get along, he gone just fine without me. Get along, just barely. Get along, he gone.
Hope y'all enjoyed Somebody Else's Country House by Westinghouse Atom Smasher, this week's Haven Artist Spotlight. Haven PGH is the best and newest music venue in Oakland. You'll be able to catch them this weekend at Haven. You can find their link in the description, havenvenue.com, and you can get tickets to see Westinghouse Atom Smasher at Haven this weekend. Now, getting into this week's social topic, we're going to be talking about the impact of travel, the importance of travel in shaping a worldview. I leave the floor open to you, Dr. Brigham.
Right. Well, where to start? Right. It's funny because I think what first pops into my head, I can speak, or I will speak, I said in this case, from my own experiences, my own perspectives, right? And one important thing that you learn the more you travel, the more you meet people, the more you talk, is that no matter how much you do it, your perspective is always going to be tiny, right? My view is my view, and it's a fraction of the entire worldview. And so, I've been, as I said, lucky in so many ways. And even before I get into the travel side of it, what's been so fun for me, at least, has been, the people that I've met along the way that have told me about their own experiences coming from different places. Even just going from Vermont to Nashville, Tennessee was such an experience, and understanding different people, whether it was people from Nashville, or then I started meeting people of different backgrounds, of different cultures. I worked in the cafeteria to try to make ends meet while I was there, and got to interact with some good old Southern boys, but also, there was a guy from India, and got to know him a little bit, and his background and his culture, and things like that, right? It's just as a random example. When I went to grad school, I became good friends with an Iranian man, and he joined, the research group. That's how I got to know him, and we would spend time, not necessarily during the workday, but after the workday, we'd spend time just chatting, and I would learn about his experiences in life, particularly academic at first, right? I'd learn, okay, what was school like for you? And even things like, that was the first time I learned that they scored everyone out of 20, right? I was like, oh my God, what do you mean? How can you score out of 100? And he's like, no, the top score is 20. And that's the best you can possibly do. But understanding, what drives people to be the way that they are is such an interesting thing. I think probably the biggest, or I should say, my first really, really interesting, mind-opening trip was when I went with my wife to visit her parents, who at the time were living in Beijing, China. And I'm racking my brain now. I want to say that was probably 2004, 2005 range. Because I was in grad school at the time, so I hadn't started here at Pitt. And that was it blew my mind, right? I think it's the first time in my life where I landed someplace, and I think I just had my eyes wide open, my mouth agape for probably the next 2 hours, right? Just looking around, and especially a place like Beijing, right? I mean, you're going from, so I grew up in Vermont. The whole state of Vermont is like 400,000, or not even 400,000 people, right? Beijing, China is how many million in that one city? Even then, right? Even that many years ago, right? More than 20 years ago, it was like that. And so not just the sights and the sounds, but even I remember the smell in the air, because it was wintertime, and they were burning a ton of coal. So just everywhere you were, you could smell that coal burning, this kind of sulfur smell in the air. But it was neat, it was definitely, eye-opening just from that experience of what you could see and you could hear and you could smell. But it was also, I think, that was the first time in my life where I was not a majority ethnically, right? And that was neat, right? Neat to kind of just get out and, people will say, it's funny because I didn't have the experience. I'm telling you, other people that talk about this. Oh, and everybody was looking at me. Nobody was looking at me. Nobody. Right? I mean, it's a big city, right? There's other things they're looking at. But for me, I was looking at everybody else, right? Thinking like, wow, I'm around people, and nobody here looks like me, right? And that was important, I think, for me. I was a young man at that time. I was 20. Let's guess 22, something in that range, right? And it's not the same, right? By any means of growing up in an environment where you're different from everybody around you, but at least you have that window for a short time, right, of understanding it. It was tough, right, gunning around, because certainly at that time, and I'm not sure if it's better or not, because I went since then, but not any time recently. The inability to communicate was obvious, right? I mean, I needed somebody there with me to get around, just to be able to talk to taxi drivers or talk to the people in the shops or whatever it is that you needed to do. My wife and my sister and her sister, were there with us, and they could speak a bit of Chinese, so at least we could walk to the local shops and we could get by with that kind of thing. But since that time, I've been really lucky, especially through academia, right? Academia allows you in a lot of ways to travel internationally or at least nationally. When I was a PhD student, I was able to have a trip to Vienna, Austria. I had a trip to Venice, Italy, right? So these are just really, really beautiful places. I mean, forget anything that, it was cool to see those locations. And since that time, as I was saying earlier in our chat, one of the biggest things that happened in my life was I was able to go to some different countries and teach. And I think that, for me, not just because it's my profession, because it's my personality, right? That I really like to sit down and talk to people about who they are and what their life is like. And as a teacher, I'm able to do that, right? I'm able to meet students, not all of them, but at least some of them will always come to your office hours, no matter where you are, I've found, and just chat to you about what's going on, who they are. And, especially if you're willing to ask questions, right? Hey, what's that on your shirt, right? Even that, it starts a conversation of who somebody is and what their experiences are. So I think my first experience with that, if I'm not forgetting anything, was I was able to go and teach in Japan. I was able to teach in Tokyo for 6 months, which was just amazing.
The shock of Tokyo, because it's like the most densely populated city on the planet.
Yeah, I mean, it was definitely, again, it was. I think maybe in a lot of ways, thankfully, I had that experience of going to Beijing already, right? So I'd already, seen that kind of thing that, especially, it's an Asian city. So I found certain similarities in the big Asian cities, especially, I guess, China and Japan, with lots of bright lights and sounds and things like that, so that kind of thing I was more used to. Yeah, I mean, it was a dream. It was so cool. I don't know. I try to think, it's not necessarily anything about the size of Tokyo. It's just all the things that you can do in Tokyo are just fantastic. It's absolutely my favorite city, I think, in the world.
It's on my bucket list.
Yeah, it's a spectacular place. There's always something interesting to do. My wife and I, one of our favorite things to do in any place that we're visiting, is just walk around. And it's a very walkable city. You can always end up finding something interesting. And as I think I mentioned earlier, she oftentimes is the one that will find out what we should be doing, right? Some activity, and there's always some activity, right? Go to some museum and see something. Even just wandering over to Tokyo Tower, there's something cool to do there, something cool to see there. We went and saw a live action Sailor Moon performance in Tokyo, which
what
is
you
wild.
know about Sailor Moon?
I know very little, other than that there's multiple sailors, and there's a guy with a tuxedo, which is pretty awesome. And yeah, I mean, Tokyo's populated quite a bit, but sorry, I'm stumbling over my words, but it's also a big city, just a big landmass. And the place that I was living, because we were working, I was working at Tokyo Institute of Technology, is in an area called Aokiyama. And so that's a bit far away, I guess, from what you would think of city center of Tokyo. So population-wise, it wasn't too bad, right? It wasn't that much of a shock to the system. You could always walk around pretty easily. You could go to restaurants, walk in without a reservation. The things that you think of when it's super densely populated that you can't do wasn't an issue. But yeah, I mean, it was cool, but it was my first experience, right, where I was actually teaching formally, I'd say, in a different country, and for a whole semester, a whole term that I spent, and I taught. I guess I was involved in 3 different classes there. So I got involved. It was an English class. That was one of the primary reasons, I think, why they wanted somebody of my kind of background there, right? Because I'm a native English-speaking person, so I'm able to bring that perspective to the class. But I also contributed a structural analysis class and an engineering mathematics class that I got to work on. And that was a bit of a culture shock. And again, this is my own experience, and it could be very, very different at different places, different universities within the country. But there, for their engineering department, at least what I was told and what I experienced, the students were actually very, very passive. And in a lot of ways, I hate to say this because they were great students, but not engaged. Right? And that's one thing that as my style, right, as I've evolved and I've learned what I like to do as a teacher, as an educator, I like to engage. So that was tough, right? That was a hard part. I mean, I had students and it wasn't out of disrespect. It was just seeming to be this cultural norm. I had half of my class at any given time was asleep, overtly, right? Like without hiding it, They'd show up, they'd put their head down, they'd go to bed, Very seldomly would anybody ask questions. And in their defense specifically on that too, right? I mean, there was definitely language barrier, right? I mean, the students spoke English, but it wasn't great, right? It was a bit of a struggle. And these were classes that were, specifically designated as taught in English. I mean, otherwise I wouldn't have been involved. But even then, right, there was that barrier that made it a bit tricky. So to their credit.
You felt more like you were lecturing at them rather than lecturing to them.
Yeah, exactly. And it was interesting. And that was, again, a learning experience just to think you kind of, your default, at least my default mode, is to be probably very naive and think, oh, well, things are probably more or less the same no matter where you're at. But then I started to learn a bit more about the educational process in Japan, and it is quite different, right? I mean, they have huge amounts of pressure, at least again, from my perspective, what I was told, huge amounts of pressure at the high school level. And that's where it really is the weed out, the make or break. And in a lot of ways, I talked to some people that are actual high school teachers there while I was there, did kind of some moving around. And I specifically got to meet some people at a high school in Kyoto. And, they were saying how they felt really bad for the students sometimes because they just dumped so much pressure on them. But it's work. And they get into their university and then it becomes a bit of a break. At least that was, again, that perspective that this person had, that it's almost like, and that's why they're saying, well, that's why you got these students, they just show up to class and they sleep because it's sort of at this point, they made it. They don't need to worry so much anymore. But it made it challenging, I think, for me to try to find my role then as the teacher. Trying to I say you try to engage them, try to, what is it that we can possibly teach. And it even got more because I started to ask people around at the university. I was like, oh, well, so what do you do? Like, how do you see your position here? And they say, well, we give them the content, we deliver it to them, we give them some handouts, so at least they have it, right? They have it available to them, whether they've learned it or not. And then we trust that, at least from the engineering standpoint, that they then will enter their job, right, the position that they get after this, and they'll be put into a training program at their job. And that was, again, another interesting thing that didn't really translate well to the U.S. system, at least I'd never heard of, right? I mean, we do have a process of being educated after your degree. I mean, that's really, in a lot of ways, structured around getting your professional engineering license, right? You should become an engineer in training, implying that you're continuing to train even though you're working, and then you're educated enough at some point where you can go and you can take a test to become a professional engineer. Well, they just take that similar type idea, or I shouldn't say take that idea, but they have a similar type thing that's just even more extreme, right? Where they become an engineer in training, but it's not, it's truly that position, right? You're not just a junior engineer, you are literally an engineer in training, where you're going to have classes, you're going to have, workshops and things that are going to teach you how to do the job that they want you to do after you're done that program. And then if you make it through that program, then you're the full-time, regular working engineer. So quite different. And I found out later actually, that once I was teaching in England, so I spent 4 years teaching in England not that long after that, that I think a lot of that is because those two programs are more similar than we are to them. So the English program and the Japanese program seem to share a lot. And I don't know if that's, based on the English sort of bringing that over in cultural exchanges, or if that just happens to be by luck, right? I've never bothered to look into the history of it. But they have a similar thing, right? I mean, it's, again, just thinking in engineering, there's aspects of the educational systems there that are very different, but that aspect of sort of at the end, you would normally, on average, get a role as a trainee and be trained by your company, right, to do the job, which is, again, sort of a little bit different than it is here. But yeah, I mean, it was a good experience from that standpoint. I'm spending a lot of time talking about what it's like to be a teacher there. I got some great opportunities to meet some of the students too and spend time with them. It was kind of cool, culturally, they very much have a culture of you should have a part-time job. Like it's not even just that you can if you want spending money, you really should. Like a lot of the college students are telling me that, yeah, my family says I need to work a few hours a week at the local pizzeria, or I need to have a job at the local shop, that kind of thing, just to get that experience while they're students.
I mean, I feel like in the U.S. we're sort of starting to move towards that way. Anyways, almost all of my friends have part-time jobs.
Yep. Yep.
It wasn't always like that.
No. Yeah. It's different. I think it's valuable, right? I always did. I think I've always had a job, even since I was 15. I think I always had some job in some shop or some cafeteria or some restaurant doing something. Yeah. But what was pretty neat as well was the research group that I was attached to while I was in Japan had several students from Nepal that were working in the group. And that was, again, another experience where I was really lucky to be able to get to know these people and just talk to them about their life. And what I learned about them that was really interesting is that they have some kind of I hate to use this term because, again, I don't mean to be uneducated on what they're supposed to be described as, but it seemed as a caste system, right, where people have some kind of ranking in the society. And the students that I was interacting with were saying, at least among them, like their own differences in that system apparently had to do largely with religious aspects. So it was kind of like if you were more in the priest group, that was considered, I think, a higher honor level, or higher sort of ranking in the caste. At least, again, within that group, there could be very much differences amongst that. So some of the students, they were showing me they actually wore these strings that represented that religious aspect of their background. But that's one where you meet people like this, and you can get a lot of things put into perspective for you. Right, they were talking about having to walk through the river to get to school every day, and so part of their daily routine was they would have to take their shoes and their socks off, hike their pants off, or even hike their pants up, or somehow put something over their legs, carry everything over their head to cross the river that they had to cross every day to get to the school that they were at. It was the literal thing. We joke as children. I'm sure nowadays people still say this, right? Your grandparents tell you they had to walk 6 miles through the snow to get to school every day. And these guys literally had to do that.
I mean, I get to tell my grandkids I lived through a global pandemic.
Well, there you go. Exactly. And so, they were just down to earth people that worked hard and quite frankly, it's interesting, didn't have a lot of expectations for life, but were going to do their best job to get to whatever they could, right? To whatever that far off target would be. Yeah.
So I do have 2 questions for you before we close this out. So number 1, in terms of travel, you have experience teaching in England, in Japan, and in China.
Yes.
And you've been a tourist in several other places.
Yep.
What is the experience like? How does it differ between when you're in a place for work and when you're in a place for pleasure?
That's a good question. I mean, I'd say in a lot of ways, I think somehow more fondly of the times that I've been in a place for work than if I'm in a place for pleasure. Even though, obviously when you're on vacation, it's more fun on average. Just the experience to learn about the day-to-day life, right? I mean, to learn about what really goes on with people. I mean, that's the stuff that I would rather reflect on, when I'm just, at night hanging out with my wife and we're talking about life and what we've done and what we're going to do. That's the stuff that's more fun to chat about, right? And to remember. Even though sometimes we do remember, the time spent on the beach somewhere hanging out, or, the place having cocktails in some, place in Austria or wherever. I mean, those are wonderful memories. But I'm just so fascinated by people, right? And I think it's hard to learn really deeply about people until you work next to them, right? And you get to interact with them, and in my case, teach them too, right? I mean, working with them and teaching people I can't think of a better opportunity to learn about what drives people, right? How they function. And we are all human, right? We're all the same, and that's another thing about traveling, experience things that you get a little bit less intimidated by the world, and we all bleed, we all age, we all will live, and then someday we'll die. But we're different. And those differences are super cool, right? I mean, it's so fun to understand, why somebody does what they do, or, what drives them to be who they are. And I mean, I just think if you don't go out and chat with people, or if you don't go out and experience that, then you'll never know. Right?
So my last question for you is about the importance of travel. So you're getting your passport stamped with all these places you're going, with all these different life experiences, social experiences, work experiences. You're becoming a global citizen in a sense, where you take from each culture that you immerse yourself within and you spend time with. How does being a global citizen, has that shaped your day-to-day life and your worldview?
I mean, this actually probably goes back to, when we were talking about life advice, and I started with the golden rule. I mean, I think that in a lot of ways, traveling and getting out there is important just to understand that we're not the center of the universe, right? I mean, and if we want good things to happen for ourselves, we also need to hope for good things for others. The world is in conflict, right? And it has been for my entire life. And it does no good to try to insulate and only look out for yourself, or I shouldn't even say only look out for yourself, because, sometimes that is necessary. But to only hope for good things for yourself, that's never necessary. And I think that we should hope for good things for everybody around us. And so getting out there and seeing other people, and like I said, that have the same needs and life experiences as you, and also very different ones, is critically important to appreciate that. I mean, like I said, very, very much nowadays. One of the most formative things in my young adult life that I didn't mention in the beginning is that, one of my best friends growing up ended up going to Iraq and was killed in action in Iraq. And I would never, thankfully would never and have never held any resentment towards Iraq for that, right? It's one of the saddest things that's ever happened. But it's not, it's not because of Iraq. It's not because of the world, right? It's not, America, if should win and they should lose, right? It can't be that, right? I mean, we should all hope that we all win in the end, right? And can live good lives and be happy and healthy.
I think that with my experience with global citizenship, one of the biggest things that I've come to appreciate, or that I have learned, is I'm one of 8 billion people. And every single person that you see on the street, on TV, anywhere, is just as much of a main character in their story as you are. Everybody has a story. Everybody's somewhere for a reason.
Absolutely.
A lot of times, just like driving down the street, somebody cuts you off, and you're like, okay, jack off.
Yeah.
Like, maybe they're speeding off somewhere because they're late for work. They need to pick up their kid. Their wife's in labor. You never know. Everybody has a story, and the world doesn't just revolve around you, like you said. Though, before we close off this podcast, is there anything else you want to get across to the audience?
Nothing I can think of. I mean, I hope that we all stay positive, because maybe that's the end thing for me, right? Is that I want to be optimistic, and thankfully, if you get out of your house at least, get out of the country every once in a while, or at least get out of town once in a while, you'll see other things. You'll see reasons to be frustrated sometimes, but I think on average I've seen more reasons to be happy and more reasons to be optimistic, which, it's a good thing.
It's a great thing.
Yeah.
So, as always, all things Dr. Brigham will be in the description of this episode. If you'd like to reach out and contact him, LinkedIn, all things will be in the description. This has been another incredible episode of the Let's Talk Socialization. I very much appreciate your time, Dr. Brigham. And this was just a great chat in general.
Thank you.
Anyways, y'all, this is your host, Ian Kahinde, and we are signing off. Peace out, y'all.